Chapter 12. Hector storms the wall. While the gallant Patroclus was attending Eurypylus' wound in the hut, the Argives and Trojans fought on, throwing in all their men. It did not look as though the Danaans' trench and the thick wall behind it would hold out much longer. When they built this wall for the ships, with the trench alongside, they had failed to make ritual offerings to the gods, and so to provide themselves with a safe enclosure for their fleet and the vast spoils they had taken. The wall was built without the goodwill of heaven, and it did not last for long. While Hector was alive and Achilles sulked, in fact, as long as King Priam's city remained unsacked, the great Achaean wall survived. But later, when all the best of the Trojans were dead, and many of the Argives too, though some were left, when King Priam's city had been sacked and the 10th year of the siege, and the Argive expedition had sailed home, Poseidon and Apollo decided to destroy the wall by turning against it the united waters of all the rivers that ran down from the range of Ida to the sea. Rhesus, Heptaphorus, Corysus, and Rhodius, Granicus, and Asepus, lovely Scamander, and Simois, on whose banks many a shield and helmet and many a warrior of that heroic generation had fallen in the dust. All these rivers Phoebus Apollo brought together at one mouth, and for 9 days he flung their waters at the wall, while Zeus reigned without ceasing to submerge it the quicker. Trident in hand, the earth-shaker himself directed the torrent, washed out to sea all the wooden and stone foundations that the Achaeans had laid down with such labor, and leveled the shore of the fast-flowing Hellespont. When the wall had disappeared, he covered the wide beach once more with sand and turned the rivers back into channels down which their limpid streams had run before. All this remained to be done by Poseidon and Apollo. At the moment, the wall stood unimpaired and was the scene of a tumultuous battle, the woodwork of its towers resounding to the enemy's missiles. For the Argives, cowed by the lash of Zeus, were penned in and held beside the hollow ships in fear of Hector, the mighty panic maker, who was raging as ever with the fury of a gale. He was like a wild boar or a lion when he turns this way and that among the hounds and huntsmen to defy them in his strength. They close their ranks, confront him like a wall, and pelt him with showers of darts. But there is no fear nor any thought of flight in his dauntless heart. His very courage kills him. Time and again he turns and tries some new point in the ring of men, and wherever he charges, the ring gives way. Thus Hector darted to and fro among his men, goading the charioteers to cross the trench. But when it came to the point, his own fast horses jibbed. They were frightening by its width and halted at the brink, neighing shrilly. Indeed, the dike was by no means easy to take at a bound, or to cross at all. Both banks were overhanging all along, and on top there was a row of pointed stakes, close set and strong, which the Achaean troops had planted there to keep out their enemies. So this was not a place where horses could break in with a chariot trundling after them. However, the infantry were eager to attempt the passage, and with this in view Polydamas went up to the lion-hearted Hector and made a suggestion to him and the other Trojan and allied commanders. "It would be folly," he said, "to cross the ditch in our chariots. The palisade on top makes it well nigh impossible, and close behind comes the Achaean wall, leaving the charioteers no room whatever to dismount and fight. In fact, so narrow a strip that I am certain they would come to grief. If Zeus the Thunderer is really on our side and means the Danaans to be utterly destroyed, then well and good. There is nothing I want more than to see them perish from Argos, here and now, and be forgotten. But what if they round on us? If we are driven back from the ships by a rally on their part and get entangled in the trench, I do not think a single man would escape to bring the news to Troy. I have a better plan, and I hope you will adopt it. Let our squires hold our horses at the trench, while we on foot and in our full equipment follow Hector in a body. The Achaeans won't stand up to us if their doom is really sealed." This advice from Polydamas seemed excellent to Hector. He jumped down at once from his chariot in his full armor, and all the Trojans abandoned their chariot formation when they saw Prince Hector dismount. Leaping out, they told their drivers to keep their horses drawn up in proper order by the trench. Then they stood clear, sorted themselves out, and fell in behind their own captains in 5 companies. Of these, the best and biggest was that which Hector and the peerless Polydamas commanded. None showed greater eagerness to breach the wall and fight by the hollow ships. Cebriones, in whose stead Hector had left a less valuable man with his chariot, was 3rd in command. The 2nd company was led by Paris, Alcathous, and Agenor, and the 3rd by 2 of Priam's sons, Helenus and the godlike Dephobus, and as 3rd in command the noble Asius, son of Harticus, whom his big and glossy horses had brought from Arisbe and the river Sellius. Aenus, the handsome son of Anchises, led the 4th company, supported by 2 sons of Antenor, Archelicus and Acamas, men with experience in every kind of fighting. Sarpedon commanded the glorious allies and had appointed under him Glaucus and the warlike Asteropaeus, whom he considered beyond question the best men among the allies, next to himself, he being the finest soldier of them all. Thus they drew up, shield touching ox-hide shield, and resolutely advanced on the Danaans in the confidence that nothing could stop them now from swooping down on the black ships. Of the Trojans and their famous allies, all except Asius, son of Hyrtacus, adopted the tactics suggested by the admirable Polydamas. But Asius, who was a ruling prince, objected to leaving his chariot behind with his squire in charge, and decided instead to drive right up to the good ships with his whole equipage. He was a fool. He was not destined to evade his evil fate and drive back his chariot and pair in triumph from the ships to windy Ilium. In the spear of the sublime Idomeneus, Deucalion's son, abominable doom was waiting to engulf him. For he did drive, aiming at the left flank of the ships where the Achaeans had a causeway that they used themselves when returning from the plain. Here Asius drove his chariot and horses over, and coming to the gateway, found that the doors had not been closed, nor the long bar put in place. The defenders were holding them open to give stragglers flying from the field a chance to reach the ships. So Asius in his chariot made straight for the gate, backed by his company, uttering their piercing war cry. These foolish people thought the Achaeans could not stop them now from sweeping down on the black ships. But as the gate they met two champions, both of them proud scions of the warlike Lapith race. One was the stalwart Polypoetes, son of Pirithous, and the other Leotius, a peer of the murderous war god. This pair had planted themselves in front of the high gate, the lofty mountain oaks that resist the wind and rain forever, supported by their long, sturdy roots. Thus the two, relying on their brawny arms, awaited the onslaught of the great Asius and stood firm. The Trojans, massing themselves around King Asius, Iameneus, Orestes, Adamas, son of Asius, Thun, and Onomaus, held up their leather shields, with a mighty shout made straight for the wall. For a while, the two Lapithae encouraged the Danae, men-at-arms, inside the ramparts to fight there for the ships. But when they saw the Trojans storming at the wall, and heard sounds of disorder and panic among the Danaans behind them, they came right out and fought in front of the gate, like a pair of wild boars in the mountains, facing a noisy mob of men and dogs, charging to either flank, and crushing and rooting them up, the undergrowth around them to the sound of clattering tusks, till at last they are hit by someone's javelin and killed. Thus, the shining bronze on the breasts of the Lapithae rang out as it met the enemy's blows. For they put up a superb defense, trusting in their own strength and in their friends on the wall above, who were battling for their lives and for their camp and gallant ships by flinging stones down from the well-built ramparts. The Trojans too hurled stones, and showers of rock from the hands of either side came pelting to the ground like the flakes in a blizzard, when the dark clouds fly before the wind and the bountiful earth is blanketed with snow. Helmets and bossed shields rang harshly out as the great boulders hit them. Asius, son of Hyrtacus, was in despair. He groaned, he slapped his thighs, and he cried out, Father Zeus, I did not know that you were such a lover of the lie. I never thought these bold Achaeans could withstand our fury. I fancied we were irresistible, but look at them now. Ready, the pair of them to kill or be killed before they give way from the gate, like supple wasted wasps or bees that have built in a hollow by a rocky path and won't be driven from their home, but stay and fight it out with the huntsman for their children's sake. This outburst from Asius had no effect on Zeus, who had made up his mind to let Hector have the glory. Meanwhile, other Trojan companies had carried the fighting to other gates. But how can I picture it all? It would take a god to tell the tale. All along the stone wall, fierce fires had broken out, and the hard-pressed Argives were compelled to fight for their very ships. All the gods who had taken sides with them were broken-hearted. But here it was the two Lapithae who now attacked. Perithous' son, the stalwart Polypoetes, cast his spear and hit Damasus on his bronze-sided helmet. The metal of the helmet failed to check the metal of the spear. The point went through it, pierced the bone, and spattered the inside of the helmet with the man's brains. That was the end of Damasus and his part in the assault. Next, Polypoetes killed Pylon and Ormensus. Meanwhile, Leotius, offshoot of Ares, had flung his spear at Hippomachus, son of Antimachus, and caught him on the belt. Then he drew his sharp sword from its sheath and dashed into the throng, where the first man he encountered was Antiphates. Closing, he struck him with his sword and brought him crashing to the ground flat on his back. Then, in swift succession, he brought Menon, Iamenus, and Orestes all nearer than they had been to the kindly soil. While the Lapithae were stripping the resplendent armor from these men, the young warriors under Polydamas and Hector, who formed the best and biggest of the companies, and had shown the greatest eagerness to breach the wall and set the ships on fire, were standing at the trench, still hesitating to advance. Just as they were going to cross, a portent had appeared to them, an eagle flying high, alone, and their front on the left, with a blood-red snake in its talons. The monster was alive and still gasping, and he showed signs of fight. Writhing back, he bit his captor on the breast beside the neck, whereupon the eagle in his pain released his hold, let the snake drop among the troops, and with a loud cry sailed away down the wind. The Trojans were appalled when they saw the snake lie shimmering in their midst to indicate the will of aegis-bearing Zeus. Polydamas went straight up to the dauntless Hector. "Hector," he said, "as a rule you object when I offer sound advice at our assemblies. You consider it impertinent for a commoner to disagree with you either in the council chamber or in the field. Your authority must always be upheld. But once again, I am going to speak my mind and say what I think best. I know exactly what will happen if the portent does not lie. Just as we were ready to cross, the eagle appeared to us out of the sky, flying on the left along our front, with a monstrous blood-red snake in its talons. The snake was alive, and the bird had to drop it before it reached his nest. He failed to get it home and give it to its young. In the same way, even if by a great effort we succeed in breaking down the Achaean gate and wall, and the enemy give way, our retirement from the ships over the same ground will prove disastrous. The Achaeans will be fighting for their ships. They will kill numbers of our men, and we shall have to leave them all behind. That is how a soothsayer who really understood such omens and had the army's confidence would interpret this portent. Hector of the flashing helmet gave him a black look. "Polydamas," he said, "I do resent this interference on your part. Surely you could have done better than that. If you really mean what you say, the gods themselves must have addled your brains. Zeus the Thunderer, in his own person and with all solemnity, made me certain promises. These you tell me to forget, and instead you would have me base my actions on the flight of birds, winged creatures who do not interest me at all. In fact, I do not care whether they fly to the right towards the morning sun or to the left into the western gloom. Let us pin our faith on the mandate of Almighty Zeus, who governs all mankind and the gods as well. Fight for your country. That is the best and only omen. But why should you, of all men, think and shrink from battle? Even if the rest of us are slaughtered wholesale by the Argive ships, you need have no fear for your own safety. You are not the man to stand and fight it out. Nonetheless, if you do shirk or dissuade any of the others from fighting, I shall not hesitate to strike you with this spear and take your life." Thereupon Hector gave the signal to advance, and with a mighty roar his men went after him. From the mountains of Ida, Zeus, who delights in thunder, unleashed a gusty wind which raised the dust and blew it straight at the ships, thus bewildering the Achaeans and giving the advantage to Hector and the Trojans. Trusting in this token of the gods' good will and in their strength, they now made determined efforts to breach the great Achaean wall, tearing at the parapets of the towers, pulling down the battlements, and levering up the projecting buttresses that the Achaeans had let into the ground outside to support the towers, in the hope that by undermining these they might bring down the wall itself. For all that the Danaans would not yield them entrance, they closed up the embrasures with ox-hide screens, and from the battlements pelted the enemy as they came up beneath the wall. The two Aeantes ranged everywhere along the top, directing the defense and exhorting the Achaeans. Some they disposed of with a mild rebuke, but to others, who had abandoned all resistance, they were used harsher terms. Knowing too that it takes all kinds to make an army, they appealed not only to their picked men, but to those of average ability and to the inferior troops. "Friends, Argives," they said, "today there is work for every man of you. You know this well enough yourselves. Let no one listen to the Trojan threats and turn his face to the ships. Forward instead, straight at the enemy, cheering each other on and trusting that Olympian Zeus, Lord of the lightning, will let us counter this attack and chase them back to their town. Thus the two Aeantes, by their exhortations, held the Achaean front together. By now the stones were falling thick as snowflakes on a winter day when Zeus the thinker has begun to snow and let men see the javelins of his armament, when he has put the winds to sleep and snows without ceasing, till he has covered the hilltops and the bold headlands of the coast and the clover meadows and the farmers' fields, till even the shores and inlets of the grey sea are under now, and only the breakers fend it off as they come rolling in. Everything else is blanketed by the overwhelming fall from Zeus's hand. Such were the showers of stones that flew in both directions as the Achaeans pelted the Trojans, and the Trojans the Achaeans, till the whole length of the wall was thundering to the volleys they exchanged. But even now, illustrious Hector and his Trojans would not have broken down the gate in the wall and the long bar, if Zeus the counselor had not inspired his son Sarpedon to fall on the Argives as a lion falls on cattle. Sarpedon swung his round shield to the front, his splendid shield of beaten bronze, hammered out by the smith and backed with hide after hide, stretched together with gold wire that ran right round the circle. With this in front of him, and brandishing two spears, he set out like a mountain lion who has long been short of meat, and has the hardihood to assault the very walls of a homestead and explore the pens. Even if he finds herdsmen on the spot guarding the sheep with dogs and spears, he has no mind to be chased away without a venture in the fold, and either leaps in and pounces on a sheep, or is himself struck down on meeting the defense by a javelin from a quick hand. Thus did the godlike Sarpedon feel impelled to assault the wall and break through the battlements. He turned to Glaucus, Hippolochus' son. "Glaucus," he said, "why do the Lycians at home distinguish you and me with marks of honor, the best seats at the banquet, the first cut off the joint, and never empty cups? Why do they all look up to us as gods? And why were we made the lords of that great estate of ours on the banks of Xanthus, with its lovely orchards and its splendid fields of wheat? Does not all this oblige us now to take our place in the Lycian van and fling ourselves into the flames of battle? Only so we can make our Lycian men-at-arms say this about us when they discuss their kings: they live on the fat of the land they rule. They drink the mellow vintage wine, but they pay for it in their glory. They are mighty men of war, and where Lycians fight, you will see them in the van." Ah, my friend, if after living through this war we could be sure of ageless immortality, I should neither take my place in the front line, nor send you out to win honor in the field. But things are not like that. Death has 1,000 pitfalls for our feet, and nobody can save himself and cheat him. So in we go, whether we yield the glory to some other man or win it for ourselves. Glaucus did not turn a deaf ear to Sarpedon's call, and the two went forward, with the great Lycian force at their heels. When he saw them coming, Menethnius son of Petios, shuddered, for it was against his sector of the Achaean ramparts that the menace was directed. Looking along the wall for some commander who could save his company from disaster, he saw the two Aeantes, those gluttons for battle, standing quite near, with Teucer, who had just come from his hut. But shouting was no good. The noise was so great that he could not hear them. The sky was assaulted by the din of smitten shields and crested helmets, let alone the pounding at the gates, for these were all closed by now, and the Trojans had come up and were trying to break them down by force their way in. Quickly deciding what to do, Menestheus sent the herald Theutes with a message to Telamonian Aias. "An errand for you," he said. "My good Theutes, run and call Aias, or rather both of them. That would be best of all, for we shall soon be wiped out here. The Lycian captains are making straight at us, and we know what savages these Lycians can be when they come to grips. But if the two of them over there are as hard-pressed as ourselves, let us at least have the brave Telamonian Aias, and tell him to bring Teucer, the great bowman, with him." The herald set out promptly with his errand, ran along the Achaean wall, and when he reached the Aeantes, accosted them at once. "My lords and commanders," he said, "Menestheus, my noble master, begs you to come over, if only for a little while, and lend him a hand in his difficulties. Preferably both of you. That is what he would like best of all, for we shall soon be wiped out over there. The Lycian captains are making straight at our sector, and we all know what savages these Lycians can be when they come to grips. But if you are equally hard-pressed here, he hoped that you at least, my gallant lord, the son of Telamon, would join him and bring Teucer, the great bowman, with you." The mighty Telamonian Aias did not refuse his help. Turning to Oilus' son, he instructed him carefully. "Aias," he said, "I want you and our stalwart Lycomedes to stay here and see that our people keep the enemy engaged. While I go and counter the attack over there, I shall soon be back, directly I have saved our friends." With that, Telamonian Aias set off, and his brother Teucer, his own father's son, went with him, attended by Pandion, carrying his crooked bow. Since they were making for a spot where the pressure was intense, they went along inside the wall, and so reached the sector commanded by the great-hearted Menestheus. Here they found the redoubtable vanguard and captains of the Lycians storming at the battlements like a tempest in the dark. They hurled themselves at the enemy, and the tumult was intensified. Telamonian Aias was the first to kill his man, a comrade of Sarpedon's, the generous Epicles. He hit him with a jagged lump of rock that he picked up inside the battlements from the top of a heap beside an embrasure. This great trunk, which the sturdiest youngster of our generation would have found difficult to lift with both his hands, Aias heaved above his head and flung, crushing the helmet with its quadruple ridge and smashing the man's skull to pieces. Epicles dropped from the high tower like a diver, and the spirit left his bones. Meanwhile Glaucus, the stalwart son of Hippolochus, was accounted for by Teucer. As he charged, Teucer saw his arm exposed and struck it with an arrow shot down from the rampart, spoiling the fight for Glaucus, who drew back hastily and unobtrusively from the wall so that the Achaeans might not see that he was wounded and gloat over him. Sarpedon suffered keenly when he realized that Glaucus was gone. Yet for all this, his ardor was not quenched. He thrust up with a spear at Thestor's son, Alcmaeon, struck him, and tried to drag the weapon out. The man came with it, falling headlong from the wall, and his ornate bronze equipment rang upon him. Then Sarpedon got his mighty hands on the battlement. He gave a pull, and a whole length of the breastwork came away, exposing the top of the wall. He had made a breach big enough for a company, but he still had to reckon at one and the same time with Aias and Teucer. An arrow from Teucer hit the bright baldric that ran across his breast and supported his man-covering shield. And though Zeus saved him from destruction, not wishing that his son should meet his doom by the sterns of the ships, Aias now came charging down on him and struck his shield again. The weapon failed to penetrate, but it staggered him in his onset, and he had to withdraw a little from the battlements. Even so, Sarpedon did not go right back. He was still filled with hopes of glory, and wheeling round, he shouted to his war and godlike Lycians, "Lycians, why have you let your resolution seep away like this? Strong as I am, I can hardly breach the wall alone and make a pathway to the ships. After me then, and the more the better." The Lycians took the king's rebuke to heart, and on either side of their royal leader attacked with greater vehemence than ever. But the Argives for their part reinforced the companies behind the wall, and the struggle that ensued was desperate for both sides. Neither could the stalwart Lycians break down the Danaan wall and establish a road to the ships, nor were the Danaan spearmen able to thrust back the Lycians once they had gained a footing on the wall. Divided by the battlements between them, they were like two men quarreling across a fence in the common field with yardsticks in their hands, each of them fighting for his fair share in a narrow strip. Over the breastwork, they hacked at each other's leather shields, the great round bucklers or the light targets that they held across their chests. The cruel bronze bit into many a warrior's flesh, and that not only when a man swung round and bared his back, it often went home clean through the shields themselves. All along, the towers and battlements were drenched with mingled Trojan and Achaean blood. And yet, the Trojans were unable to set their enemies on the run. The Achaeans held on, and the battle was as nicely balanced as the scales in which an honest working woman balances the wool against the weights to make sure of the meager pittance she is earning for her children. The struggle was as equal as that, till the moment when Zeus gave the mastery to Hector, son of Priam, who was the first to leap inside the Achaean wall. He used his voice and sent it ringing through the Trojan ranks. "On with you, Trojan charioteers!" he cried. "Down with the Argive wall, and let us see the ships go up in flames." There was no Trojan ear that did not catch his stirring call. Massing together, they charged at the rampart and began to scale the parapet with sharp spears in their hands. But Hector seized and brought along a rock that was lying in front of the gate. Broad at the base, though, running to a point, it would have taxed his strength of 2 of his best men in any city of these days to lever it up from the ground and onto a cart. But Hector handled it alone without an effort. Zeus, in his wisdom, made it light for him. As easily as a shepherd picking up a ram's fleece in one arm carries it off and scarcely feels the weight. He lifted up the rock and brought it to bear on the panels that filled in the mortised framework of the high double doors, which were held on the inner side by 2 sliding bars locked by a single bolt. He went right up, and taking a firm stance with his legs well apart to make sure of a powerful throw, he cast, hit the doors full in the middle, and broke the hinges off on either side. Its own momentum carried the rock within, and there was a great roar from the gate as the panels were smashed to splinters by the impact of the stone, and the bars gave way. Glorious Hector leapt inside with a look like nightfall on his face. He held 2 spears in his hand, and the bronze on his body shone with a baleful light. None but a god could have met and held him as he sprang through the gate. And now, with fire flashing from his eyes, he turned to the crowd behind him and called on the Trojans to surmount the wall. His men responded promptly. Some swarmed over the wall, others poured in through the gate itself. The panic-stricken Danaans fled among the hollow ships, and hell was let loose.